Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to do a video that is a little reminiscent of my OG videos where we'd go on Tumblr deep dives and we'd look at the weird communities that are on Tumblr. This time it's not Tumblr, it's Reddit, but it does connect to something I have talked about before, yikes, which is being a feeder and feederism, which, I mean, I think the name is pretty self-explanatory. But it's essentially a fetish, depending on, where you stand, of feeding someone a lot or being fed a lot to the point where, you gain massive amounts of weight. And, some people I think are also in it for the bloating aspect. Now, before we get into this, I can already see the comments coming. 1, I'm fat shaming. 2, I'm kink shaming. 3, I don't know what the third one would be, but I'm just going to preface this here. The reason I'm talking about this is because 1, I find it interesting, and 2, if you want to do this, if you want to eat yourself to death, because literally we're talking about death feeders today, go off. It is your life. You do exactly what you want with your body, and I'm not going to stop you, and neither is anyone else in the comment section, so whatever you want to do, you do it. I am pro doing whatever the fuck you want with your body.
Hi, quick note from me in editing. When I say that you can do whatever you want with your body, that is not me condoning self-harm in whatever form it may be. It's obviously just me saying that you have reign over your own body. I am going to be leaving numbers of different hotlines down below in the case that you do feel like you need help or like you need some support. Anyway, let's just get back into the video.
I know that there's going to be the fat shaming comments. Listen, as someone who has eating disorder, I'm just going to say that I do think that certain people here do maybe have eating disorders. I'm not going to diagnose them. I'm just saying, as someone who has had problems with binging and purging, I see some parallels here. But other than that, we're just going to look into a community that isn't necessarily mainstream, and we're just going to talk about it, and that's really all it is. So I figured we could read a few posts. All of these are obviously going to remain anonymous, but just to get an idea of what the community is like, at least the community on Reddit. And of course, Reddit doesn't determine the entire community, just like Tumblr doesn't determine any entire communities. I stepped away from gaining and aiming to be as unhealthy as I can be, and now I regret it. So a few months back, I stepped away from the community and lost about 20 pounds. My clothes fit better, I can walk without getting out of breath, and my feet don't hurt as much. I regret it all, honestly. I miss how it feels to have my heart racing from walking too fast, or how hard it is to breathe after eating too much. My old goal was to hit 500 plus pounds and make everything so much harder to do. I think I'm ready again to gain so much I can't function normally. You understand why when I read a post like this, it's alarming, because as much as I'm all for having your own consensual legal fetishes, it's also like when you read things like this, some part of you, or at least of me, wonders how much of this is actually a fetish versus how much of this might be something underlying, in the sense of there were times when in the past when I was at the height of a certain part of an eating disorder, I was very much into over-exercising. I would come up with excuses as to why I liked exercising when the reality was that there was an unhealthy pattern going on there. Like I said, not diagnosing anyone, but you have to also ask yourself why someone would want to be immobile. And I think it's also a different thing to have an immobile fetish where you like pretend to be immobile or, not be able to get up or do things by yourself. But it's a different thing when you turn that fetish into a reality where you might very well become immobile. And that, I don't think, is anything that any person is really prepared for. Even the people who think they're the most prepared for that, I don't think a lot of people really understand the full extent of not being able to go to the bathroom by yourself, having to rely on someone else constantly for help. Like if something happens to you when you're home alone, God knows what you're going to do. So, you know what I'm saying? I'm just questioning how much is a fetish versus how much is something unhealthy that's underlying, because I've dealt with that myself. I really love when my heart races and I get out of breath easily, because it shows how unhealthy I really am. It's generally hard for me to gauge my health, but when I can feel my heart beating heavily through the thick layer of fat on my chest, and my breathing becomes labored and heavy from doing so little, I can feel the consequence of my unrestrained gluttony. And this feeling just makes me want to continue eating, so it becomes more and more apparent just how unfit, unhealthy, and pathetic I'm becoming. So I remember while I was doing research for all of this, I read on a Tumblr blog, if you say that you're concerned about someone's health, it's actually not that. It's that you're trying to further push certain beauty standards, which of course, typically include being thin. I don't really agree with that, because me saying that it's concerning that you're really about your health taking a downward turn, I don't think is fake, the same way that if I saw a post of a girl saying, oh, I'm so glad I haven't eaten in 5 days, I would be like, holy fuck, I'm concerned. Honestly, reading this post gave me a little bit of anxiety because the sole concept of feeling your lack of health to me is something that scares me deeply. Also because I'm slightly hypochondriacal at times, but I know that when I get anxiety and I start getting heart palpitations, I think I'm going to die, and it's like the scariest fucking thing ever. So I don't, being fully transparent, obviously, I don't relate or understand that particular feeling. I also kind of have begun to wonder, though, if some of this is kind of like adrenaline rushes, because this low-key reminds me, and that sounds terrible, but just hear me out. This low-key reminds me of when I started skydiving. So some of you might not know, I've skydived, I think 10 or 11 times. I might be getting a certification soon to just skydive by myself, because all those other times I couldn't obviously do it by myself. As terrible as it sounds, the adrenaline rush of skydiving for me, especially when I first went, because I wasn't like in the best of headspaces, was like, what if the parachute doesn't open? Which is obviously scary, but the adrenaline rush is that you're kind of relying on it will. But what if it didn't? But, you know, most of the time, hopefully it fucking does. Jesus. But some of what I read here really reminds me of that, the kind of just sitting right on the border of life and death, potentially. Now, obviously, it's different in terms of skydiving is like, you're free falling for 60 seconds, you pull the chute, you land, you're done. This, I feel like, is a delayed version of that kind of adrenaline, and I'm kind of wondering how much that accounts for this fetish. Just curious. And I mean, if there are any death feeders or feeders or fetuses, whatever the correct terminology I should use is, I would love to see your comments down below. Just to let me know if any of what I'm saying is right, if it's entirely wrong. Very curious. So this is one of the ones that made me more concerned and sad, because I feel like this is really when a fetish turns into a lifestyle, and like I said, do whatever the fuck you want, but I also feel like becoming debilitated or becoming immobile is just something that in the end will be entirely negative. I already think there are negative effects on the health, obviously, but I'm talking about even just other things like social life, how much you see your family, maybe having to rely on someone, you know, like I feel like there's a point where this crosses into almost really a death wish, which of course they're called death fetus, but I don't know how much of that is figurative versus literal, though I'm kind of starting to wonder how much of it is really literal people wanting to kill themselves with food, which is alarming. 2 medications that I'm on entirely due to my gluttony: pantoprazole for acid reflux and metformin for prediabetes. I also have IBS and non-alcoholic fatty liver. I just can't stop glutting myself on garbage. See, now this is obviously where it becomes even more alarming, because it's not even just like, oh, I like hearing myself breathe harder because I've been eating more, whatever. It's turning into, I've eaten so much because of this fetish that now I have to take these medications, and I have a series of conditions that could very well contribute to my quality of life taking a nosedive, if not worse. So I guess the question of all this video is where does a fetish cross the line, in your opinion? And like I said, everyone's free to do whatever the fuck they want, so if I think it crosses the line, still doesn't stop them from doing anything. But I really think that with a lot of fetishes, to be honest, there's an underlying condition. Like I know that with certain things that I'm into, which we're not going to get into here, certain parts of it I think are due to trauma. So like, you know, I completely acknowledge that. So I'm just wondering here, you know, what other factors may be present. So this was also alarming. So this was a question from r/morbid questions. If someone very overweight dies and the body is too heavy for people to carry in the coffin, what happens? And then someone from Death Fetus said, some of the answers to this are upsettingly hot. This one just made me uncomfortable. I absolutely love when I get small chest pains when I'm horny, especially knowing it's only gonna get worse. I don't really know what conclusion there is to really draw here. I definitely think it's an interesting community because I don't understand it really, or you know, maybe I do. If any feeders are here, you can let me know. But I do think that the important question to bring up here is how much of this is really a fetish versus how much of this may come from trauma or mental illness issues, because there are fetishes that do come from that, or you know, like kinks or whatever you want to call them. So I'm just wondering, you know, how many of these people have maybe gotten into something and just like crossed a line where some damage may very well be irreparable, which I think is the most concerning part, because as long as you can kind of make up for, damage potentially to your health, that would be at least somewhat comforting. But here I wonder how many people have just gone too far and have done so much to their bodies that they can't really get back. So if one day they actually do want to be mobile, if they want to start families, God, I don't know, if they want to have plans of sorts, being immobile obviously would get in the way of that. And I don't know, I just find it alarming when I see people who are very much playing with the idea of death or almost fetishizing the idea of death, because I can't tell, obviously, online how much of that is just kind of for the laughs or to be edgy versus how much is actually real. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always. Let's get right.